Okay, hello everyone. Josh Marshall here from Crucial Dimensions. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We're really excited to have Emily back for the last of our webinar as part of our wellbeing series and connecting crucial conversations, crucial influence, and crucial accountability into how that's really supporting building that environment within organizations. So thank you so much for making the time. We're really, in terms of today, there's a lot of people I know on the call already, and there's those that may not know anything about Crucial Dimensions and what we do. So I'll just briefly touch on that at the start, and then I'm going to hand straight into Emily on that front. So just next slide, please. So, Crucial Dimensions, if you don't know who we are, we're the exclusive licensee for Crucial Learning out of the US and their training program. So you can see here the ecosystem of courses and assessments that they provide. We started our first webinar, which was looking at Crucial Conversations for Mastering Dialogue, which is really the predominant program globally with Crucial Learning, which you hopefully would have heard of. We then went into Crucial Influence and talked about that in the second webinar. And today we're really focusing on Crucial Conversations for Accountability and how that's really, how do we build that within our leaders and our managers to really create those environments within our teams, that it's not all just stuck on the manager, so to speak, to drive that environment, but that is a collective within teams. So we're really going to touch on that today, and it's probably an important one because it's a space or an area that our team talks with clients and prospects every single day about. Every single day, it is that one or two key things that comes on the agenda every single time. So really just wanted to, it's very timely from our perspective to share this, and super happy to have Emily with us. Just as a quick guidance on the agenda, we're going to hold Q&A to the end, but what we will have is a very interactive session where we'll have the chat open. If you've got questions, fire them in there. If we can address them, we will during the webinar, but we've got a lot to get through. But also we'll be very interactive around your feedback, comments, and polls that we'll be hosting as well. So enjoy the session. I'll connect with you later on the webinar, and I'll hand over to Emily. Thanks.
All right, perfect. Thanks so much, Josh. And it's wonderful to be with all of you today. As Josh said, we are going to be doing some chatting. So I'd love to just start off with, if you could chat in, say hello, and let us know where you are dialing in from today, where you're zooming in from. It'd be great to get a sense from the group and for me just to make sure that my chat's working. So go ahead and wonderful. Dawn from Brisbane. Yes, Sydney, Brisbane, the Blue Mountains. Oh, I love it. Auckland, wonderful. Perth, woo, early. Brisbane, Wellington, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, I love this place, and I am going to say it wrong because I'm not from Australia, but is this Wollongong, Carrie? Wollongong? I love it. I'm going to look it up. It sounds fantastic already. So several from the Gold Coast, wonderful, wonderful. Hong Kong. Oh, and Tony, I'm so sorry that you can't see the sharing. We do have our wonderful tech producer, Febby Bustamante, on with us. If you are having any trouble during the session, either hearing or seeing or things like that, please go ahead and private chat to Febby, and she will be able to help you out. I do not have the skills to be able to help you out. So, okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. I am so excited for this topic. As Josh was saying, we are just hearing so much about this. Not just accountability, but this idea of how can I hold people accountable and still show up as a person of deep empathy and connection with others. And sometimes it feels like that is the dilemma. How do I do both of those? In fact, I'll just scroll. Oh, excuse me. Scroll back a slide. Sorry. Scroll back a slide to just underscore the subtitle of our webinar today: skills to lead with empathy and accountability. And as Josh said, I just think this is so pertinent and powerful right now. People are really hungry for this. I have had opportunities to present some similar versions of this presentation to audiences and some of our clients in the US. It has been one of the most requested and most seen and watched things we've done in the last 12 months, actually. And I think that just speaks to exactly how hungry people are for this particular topic and this skill set of saying, I don't want to be harsh. I don't want to be cold. I want to create well-being, and I need to do that with great accountability. So how do I marry those two? So really excited to get in. And as we start, I want to just share a couple of experiences from people that I've worked with that will maybe give you a flavor for the kinds of tough situations we're talking about. So this is Charla. Meet Charla. She is an experienced nurse manager on a busy med surgical floor in a hospital here in the US, someone that I've been able to work with. She manages a staff of 82 nurses and is currently trying to hire for 14 open positions. She has a lot on her plate, which is evidenced by the fact that she has postponed her annual vacation to deal with a hurricane aftermath and an IV fluid shortage that we had last year in the US, based on a hurricane. It damaged a processing plant, and suddenly there was a nationwide IV fluid shortage in many of our hospitals. So here's Charla, right? So, whoa, there's a lot. Now, this is the moment. This was the moment I was so interested in, because I was there when Troy, one of her employees, one of her staff, came up to her and said, Charla, I'm so sorry. I know it's the middle of the shift. I got to go. We've got a family emergency. I got to get out of here. Now, what you don't know about Troy, but Charla did, was he has an adolescent son, a teenage son who's battling drug addiction. And this is the third time in a month that Troy's had to leave mid-shift to deal with this really tough situation. So you're Charla, right? All the stress, all the things going on that I just showed you. And now here you have someone in front of you who is leaving you high and dry, as we would say in the States, right? Is not fulfilling what you need from them, but you understand why, and your heart is hurting for that. This is that moment where there's that tension state between accountability and empathy. How do you handle it? Let me give you another one. Again, this is real life. Meet Maria. Maria is a first-year manager at an incredibly busy restaurant. She manages a team of 40 people each night in a high-stress environment. She also goes to school full-time. She has 3 kids and a dog, and her husband just lost his job. So one night she's managing the busy dinner shift, and here's what happens. An employee storms out, and she thinks, wait, what, why did that employee just leave? And she comes to realize that Luca, one of the line chefs, has yelled some inappropriate things at this employee who then left. Now, this is a crucial moment. This is a moment for Maria where she has to step up and talk to Luca, hold him accountable for that behavior. But Maria also knows that over the last week or so, something seemed a little bit off with Luca. He's been way more short-tempered. He's usually very mild-mannered. She knows something's going on. She just doesn't know what. So how does she step into that moment with both accountability and empathy? These are the kinds of situations that I want you to be thinking about as we explore this tension, this tension state between holding others accountable and showing up with humanity, with empathy, right? We at Crucial Learning spend a lot of time thinking about, talking about, and teaching about what we call moments of disproportionate influence. Moments that matter more than others when it comes to relationships, results, performance, and connection. These moments that I've just shared with you, I would argue that they are those moments. Those moments when something goes wrong, and how we handle that is going to have a disproportionate influence on the results and the relationships coming out of that. So one of these moments that we study is what we call a gap situation. And that is at the heart of crucial accountability, right? Is I am facing a gap where I am expecting one thing and I'm observing or experiencing something else. I'm expecting Troy to work his complete shift. That's not happening. I'm expecting Luca to be professional and respectful. That's not happening. These are these gap situations. And often when we are faced with a gap, we as human beings, as managers, we are faced with this choice. Do I tend to lean towards accountability, Or do I tend to lean towards empathy? How do I show up in that moment? Now, I want you to think about those moments, like the ones I just shared. And I've got a question for you because I want us to think as a group where we tend to lead. So, Febby's going to go ahead and launch a poll for us. And there's two questions in this poll. And Febby, you can go ahead and launch it and get it started while while I'm explaining the poll. So, the first question is, it's about you. When you're faced with a coworker or maybe an employee's gap, when someone has let you down, what do you tend to do? Do you tend to probably err on the side of empathy? Do you think you err on the side of accountability? Do you have the perfect balance between the two? Or maybe something else? And feel free if you want to answer other to chat in and give us a more nuanced response to this question. So that's the first question. It's about you. The second question is I want you to think about the managers in your organization. What's sort of your organizational culture around this? Do you think in your organization people tend to err on the side of empathy? In general, do they in general tend to err on the side of accountability? Perfectly balanced or something else. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a moment to answer those questions. And again, would love to have more nuanced that we can get in a poll. Responses chatted in if you'd like to do that. And then we'll take a look at these results. Oh, thanks, Elisa. Great comment. Yes. Mm. Thanks, Kylie. Thanks, Emily. Love those thoughts coming in. Febby, I will tell you, I don't have access on my end to knowing kind of how we're doing in terms of responsiveness to the poll. So I'm going to leave it to you to, once we've got kind of a critical mass, we don't have to wait for 100% response, but once we've got kind of a critical mass here in the, somewhere, I don't know, 70, 80% of folks having responded in, let's go ahead and close the poll and share the results. Oh, thanks, Aaron. Yes, lots of those things. Oh, Paul, I'm sorry you can't see the poll. Feel free to jump in and just say whether you think your organization and you personally, if you'd like to, tends to err on accountability or empathy. Yeah, wonderful. Okay, great, wonderful. All right, so this is super interesting. Look at this. We are such a kind group, friends. 73% of us feel like we err on the side of empathy, right? And this is not surprising. Oh, many of you, you're in the L&D space, you're in the HR space, you're in the people space, right? So not surprisingly, right? I would expect us as this particular group, we're not necessarily a representative sample of all managers to err on that side of empathy. I love that we're seeing organizations that kind of do both, right? And organizations do have a tendency to kind of do sort of one or the other, and pretty balanced there. Not within the organization, but we've got on the webinar about half of us saying, "Oh, my organization's maybe a little too empathetic." A little too much strict on the accountability. So, of course, the goal here, and I'm going to go ahead and close that. And Febby, you can close that poll down so we have cleared it out for the slides. The goal here, of course, is to balance them both. And I want to talk about how we can do that. But before we get there, I think it's worth just thinking about why we choose one or the other, right? Why we make a choice and what we're getting when we show up with empathy and accountability. And I'd like to suggest that we choose empathy for some pretty consistent reasons. When I talk to people about why they respond in these crucial moments the way they do, we can pull out some pretty consistent themes out of the data. And those are first, it's actually kind of easy, right? I just get to be fully present in the moment, right? I don't have to worry about the processes or the outcomes or right? I just get to be right there with you, right? And that feels very easy, very sort of focused and easy. It's also fairly empowering for a lot of people who choose empathy or tend to err on the side of empathy. It feels really good to us. We feel like great people, right? I am such a good person. Look at me showing up as a good person in this moment and just leading with kindness and love, right? It can feel very empowering that way. And as I indicated with the easy, it's also very immediate, right? I don't have to think about long-term consequences. I just have to be present in that moment to connect with that person. It just feels so good right then to show up with that empathy. Now, if we look at the other side, and when we talk to people about why they might tend to lead towards accountability on that side of the equation, The answers are somewhat similar, right? So, first of all, for them, for people who lead with accountability, it tends to feel very easy. It's very straightforward, right? This was the gap. Here's what I was expecting. This is the rule. This is the policy. This is your behavior. It feels very factual, very specific, very straightforward, and can feel very easy because of that. It also feels very efficient, right? I don't have to wade through any murky emotions or feelings or how you're going to feel in response to this. I just have to get in and say, here's the facts, and we're moving on. So very efficient. And it can feel quite safe, actually. We don't have to be ourselves vulnerable at all. And we have the backup of the policy handbook, the guidelines, right? I don't have to defend anything because I can just point to the expectation that I'm holding you accountable to, right? It sort of lets me off the hook of having to be any of my emotions or vulnerabilities engaged. So it tends to be a very safe choice that way. So those are some of the reasons that we tend to choose or we see people choosing either empathy or accountability. But of course, the choice between empathy and accountability is a false one. It's a false binary. We call this a fool's choice, right? Because you don't have to make that choice. We can actually say, I can be, we create this false empathy of I can be empathetic or hold others accountable, right? We put that or in there and think, I can only do one or the other. Which way do I want to lean? But again, as I said, that's actually a false binary, and we can do both. Now, as we think about what it looks like when we do lean one way or another, I want to share with you how we tend to map this at an organizational level, not necessarily just at an individual level, but when we see teams or organizations that fall on this side of empathy or accountability. And the easiest way to see it, I think, and to sort of get our arms around this is to look at it as sort of like a two by two here. So we're going to look at it if you have high accountability and low empathy, for example. When we go into cultures and organizations with high accountability and low empathy, we tend to characterize them as what we call the toxic treadmill, right? It's just work, 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 get it done, get it done, get it done, right? And it becomes very toxic. And what we see on the individual level when an organization is high on accountability and low on empathy is actually there's an element of subversion, right? People aren't going to come out, they're not going to share, they're not going to tell you, but man, they're going to make sure they get their needs met by subverting processes or policies in ways that maybe aren't visible because they don't want to be held accountable to them, but they know they won't receive any empathy if they challenge an idea. So that would be high accountability, low empathy. Now, on the other side of that, we can think, oh, for the 73% of us that all fall on the more on the empathy side, right? What happens when you have an organizational culture or a team culture that is leaning towards that empathy? What you often start seeing is a very comfortable complacency. People talk about it as we're a family here. I love these people. It's so great. I'm going to stay here forever, right? We become very comfortably complacent. And what happens on the individual level that can be so toxic, so insidious, is that often you start experiencing some favoritism, right? Because I'm so empathetic to this person who's having this challenge, and that can appear like favoritism to everyone else who's seeing it, right? Like, oh, she always lets this person off the hook, right? And she's playing favorite. So you have to really watch out for that. Now, low accountability, low empathy. Oh, that's just a train wreck, right? We just end up with apathy and stagnation. Nobody wants to be there, right? Nobody's even trying at that point. So, not the great quadrant. The quadrant, of course, we want to shoot for is to say, how can we be an organization that has both high empathy and high accountability? Because what we know is that when you pair high empathy and high accountability, that's when you really get a thriving organization. And that's what we want to shoot for. So, as we think about it, it really does start, even though we just talked about it at the organizational level, it really does start with an individual, often an individual manager's or leader's ability to show up in those moments of disproportionate influence with empathy and accountability. So, how do you do that? I'm going to give you three ideas, three skills about how you can show up with both empathy and accountability in those gap situations, in those gap moments. So, the first one, We call it Start with Heart. Demonstrate empathy through listening and validation. Now, I want to share with you one of my favorite quotes. This quote lived on a post it note, actually, dozens of post it notes over several years because it would get old and I would have to rewrite it. On a post it note affixed to my computer screen for about the first 6 years of my career at Crucial Learning. And as you've probably read it, but I'll say it out loud. Never let a problem to be solved be more important than a person to be loved. Now, that was my note, and here's why. Because I was not like the 73% of you that led with empathy. I naturally am a very results driven, left brained, type A, red personality, alpha personality, whatever frame you want to describe that in. That's me. And especially when I started my career as a manager, I had been so successful as an individual contributor by driving and executing and getting things done that I brought that ethos with me to my role as a manager. And boy, it was hard. I was hard. I was harsh. And I realized pretty early on that I was completely out of balance when it came to these kind of moments. I fell so hard on accountability, so hard on execution that I wasn't showing up with that empathy that you all bring. And so for me, it was about saying, never let a problem to be solved be more important than a person to be loved. Now, I'm going to talk more about how this doesn't mean that we don't solve the problems. This doesn't mean that we don't go to accountability, but it's a matter of where you start. And what I found was that I needed to start with empathy if I was going to end with accountability. If I was going to get to accountability, I was going to be far more effective and true to the kind of person I wanted to be if I started with empathy. So, the skill we teach in Crucial Conversations for Accountability is focus on what you really want. Step back and say, what do I really want for me, for the other person, for our relationship, for the organization? For me, that answer, it was on that post-it note. I wanted to make sure that I was not letting problems consume people, right? That I was seeing the people behind those problems and showing up for those people. That's what was important to me. So you start by asking yourself, what is it you really want? Now, and this is so key because oftentimes what we really want is accountability. We want to close the gap, right? We want to get better results. We want to have our expectations be met. If you think about that gap between expectations and observations, we want it to close. Excuse me for just one moment. When we say, what is it we really want? We really want to get through the whole webinar without coughing. And I didn't make it this time. So apologies for that. And thank you for your patience. But as we think about what it is we really want, we often come to these conversations. And I want you to think about this, what we bring to the conversation. When we have a gap conversation, something was expected. This is what I'm observing. There's a gap between the two. The reason we are having that conversation, the reason we even see the gap is because that gap in expectations, that gap that exists, it is causing a pain or problem for us or those on our team or those we're responsible for. So we actually come to these conversations very much from the viewpoint of this is the problem that we need to solve, right? That's the only reason we're having the conversation. So it requires a mindset shift to step back and say, actually, my goal right now in this conversation, especially as I open this conversation, should not be accountability. And here's why. If your goal coming into a conversation is to hold someone accountable, you will provoke fear, not empathy. We need to move beyond accountability being the goal. Accountability, it's actually the fruit. If we come in with a goal of connection, the fruit of that conversation will be closing the gap, greater accountability, greater trust, and greater honesty. But if our goal is accountability, you will provoke fear. So we need to step back and say, what is it I really want? And how can I bring that to the conversation? Now, I want to go back, and I'm sorry I'm going back and forth on the slides, but I want to come back because as I say that, what we really want, I believe that one of the most important questions on this slide is not what do I want for me, but what do I want for them? right? So often, again, as I said, when we're facing that gap conversation, we know exactly what we want for me, right? I want the gap to close. And we often know exactly what we want from them. I want them to close the gap. I want them to meet my expectations. But that's not the question. The question is not what do I want from them? The question is what do I want for them? And that's the one that you really have to stop if you want to lead with both empathy and accountability. And you need to start by saying, what is it I want in that moment for them? Because my goal needs to be connection and understanding. And that's what will lead me to accountability. Now, as we think about that, knowing that good intent, once you know it, you have to share it. You have to share it out loud. This is where we show up with this empathy, right? And and we start with the empathy. Again, as I said, we're going to start with heart. We're going to start with this empathy piece so that we can build into a relationship that will allow for accountability and high accountability. So here's what I would say on sharing your good intent when it comes to empathy. These are not scripts that you should memorize. These are examples to give you a sense of it. But true empathy comes from our heart. And so it's going to be an expression and words that you are going to be comfortable with and heartfelt. These are things that I might say to start into that conversation. I can see this is a really tough time. You're dealing with a lot. That sounds really challenging. I'm sorry you're going through this. I'm grateful you would share this with me. I know that's not always easy. And then after you start with that empathy, right? This is so important. Stop. Pause. Let it sit there. Let it feel. Let them believe that. Let them see your sincerity, that you really mean it. If you rush this step, it will come across as insincere because it will be insincere. It will feel as if you said those things on that previous slide because you're checking a box and saying, oh, first I must say something with empathy so that I can get to what I really care about, which is solving the problem. This is a place to go slow, to pause, to let it sink in, to feel the feelings, right? To let them truly see how you care. You have to start to realize, and this was hard for me as a manager, especially when people are dealing with such tough things. My job is not to fix their life. I can't do that, right? Empathy doesn't demand that I solve their problem. That's not what empathy is. Empathy demands that I see their problem, that I name it, that we say it's visible, that I understand it, that I express the pain that they must be feeling because of the problem. But it's not my job to fix that problem, right? That's not my job. So pause, let it sit, let it feel. And then this is where we start with our good intent to move into, to start stepping into that accountability conversation, right? How can I support you right now? I want to make sure you feel supported in managing your responsibilities. Let's figure out a plan together. I trust you to do your best, right? You're dealing with something hard. I know this is hard. It's crazy hard, but I trust you to do your best. And if adjustments are needed, let's talk about what's realistic for you and the team, right? What would help? Let's start moving into this statement where we basically are saying, I know this is tough, and I want to work with you to figure out how we still hit our expectations because you are dealing with a lot right now. That is that balance between empathy and accountability. We start moving into that accountability conversation. Now, so that's the first idea. Start with heart, right? Start with that empathy, let it sit, and move slowly into that accountability. Then, as you're moving into the accountability, you have to start by clarifying the gap, being really clear. And this is one of the most powerful skills, simple yet powerful skills I think we teach in Crucial Conversations for Accountability, a way of looking at and thinking about very complex gaps that people are facing, right? So we talk about it as CPR. It does not stand for cardiopulmonary resuscitation. There are no breaths or hands or anything involved in this. CPR stands for content, pattern, and relationship. It's a way about thinking about some of these really tough gaps and kind of teasing apart what's at the core or the heart of this issue here. So, content stands for a single instance of a problem. The action itself or its immediate consequences, that's the issue right here, right? You were meant to be here on time. You are not here on time, right? Here is the content. That is the single instance of the problem. A pattern, not surprisingly, and probably very self-evident, is the reoccurring problem, right? It's not that you were late this morning, it's that you've been late 7 out of the last 10 times, right? A pattern is evolving. And then finally, relationship. And I think about this as simply, it's starting to affect how we are relating to one another. It's affecting our working relationship. Maybe because of the gap, I don't trust you, or I question your competence. I'm not sure I can count on you, right? We're starting to do workarounds because of this ongoing persistent gap that we're seeing, right? We've started to do some workarounds. That would get to that relationship level issue. Now, when you think about this, and here is the big idea that I want to share with you. Most of the persistent resistant problems that we see in organizations are caused by a failure to address issues at the pattern or relationship level. We are much better at the content level. It's easier, it feels safer. We're pretty good at being like, hey, I just saw this. Can you do this? Right? Like that little gap, right? It feels very small, very safe. But when those things persist, when those behaviors persist, when they become patterns and they start to impact our relationship, when we start to tell ourselves stories about what they mean and make judgments and draw conclusions, that's when those conversations get so tricky and those problems become so ingrained. We talk about it here, as you can see with the dandelion, the weed metaphor, right? The content is sort of what you see above the surface, and it can feel pretty easy and actually kind of great to just be like, oh, I'm just gonna snip that little yellow flower right off and my lawn will be beautiful again, all green and pretty. But if you don't get to the root of those problems, those pattern and relationship level conversations, the problem simply persists. And what we have found, interestingly enough, is that the longer the problem persists, the less empathy we tend to bring to it, right? The longer it goes on, it's like it draws down over time on our empathy, and our frustration levels increase and our empathy levels decrease. And what is so sad, I think, what is so just really disheartening about that is that's not fair. It's not fair. And here's why. Because most of the time, if you have a pattern or relationship problem, the reason that problem still exists is because you have failed to address it, right? As the slide says, we fail to address those problems. And so they persist. And as they persist, our frustration increases and our empathy decreases. So, as you think about it, we want to start having more of these content conversations, getting at these patterns earlier, and bringing more empathy to them by acknowledging that maybe the reason they've been going on this long is in part, not in whole, but in part because of our failure to address them with clarity. So, content pattern and relationship, figure out which gap it is that you need to step up to. Now, one last thing before I move off of this idea of content pattern and relationship, because this is important. Again, most of you are going to say, oh, the problem I have, it's really a pattern or relationship, and I need to go have that pattern or relationship conversation. When you do, my experience over the last 20 years tells me that about 9 times out of 10, when you go to have that pattern or relationship level conversation, the person on the other side of that conversation is going to try to drag you right back into a content conversation. And let me give you an example of how that would look. I'm going to pick on Josh. He doesn't even have to come off camera. I'm just going to use your name, Josh. So Josh and I work together. This is totally hypothetical, okay? So Josh and I work together, and as it turns out, Josh is late all the time. Like he shows up late to meetings, he shows up late to work. It's so frustrating to me, and it's really frustrating to me because A, pattern, and B, little bit of relationship. Josh and I are friends. Like I think he's maybe taking advantage of me as his manager because he thinks I'll let him off the hook because we've got a friendly relationship, right? So that doesn't sit well. That doesn't feel right. So I decide I'm going to go talk to Josh and I'm going to have a conversation with Josh about this pattern of him being late. So I come up and I say, hey, Josh, like, I noticed you were late this morning. And in fact, you've been late 7 out of the last 10 times. This is a pattern that's really concerning to me. And I'd like to better understand it so that we can hopefully address it. What do you think? And Josh says, "Oh, Emily, I know. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. You have no idea what happened this morning. I was driving in along the roadway, and as I was driving, there was an accident on the side of the road, and I had to stop and render life-saving aid." Right? It was a huge mess, right? And I was given the actual CPR there, right? So this is what Josh says. And as he says that, what is our reaction? Usually it's like, "Oh, wow, that's amazing. What happened? I'm so glad you're okay. Were they okay? Tell me about like," and we get sucked right into it. Now, if you see what's happening there, I've come to have a conversation with Josh about pattern, and he has pulled me into content, why he was late this morning, and I let him. I have to own that. If I'm going to have a conversation about pattern or relationship, I need to be prepared to keep the conversation at the level I want. And that could sound like, "Oh, wow, Josh, that sounds just intense and very emotional and incredible. I would actually really like to hear about that." And I want to make sure that that's not the focus of our conversation because, truth be told, Josh, I'm not as concerned about why you were late this morning as the pattern of you being late over the last couple of weeks, right? I move it back to pattern. If I want the conversation at the pattern level, I need to hold it there because, as I promised, I think about 9 times out of 10, people will naturally try and pull you back into content. You need to leave the conversation where you want it at that pattern or relationship level. Okay, now, so once you have clarified that gap, right? Here's what I was expecting. This is what I'm observing at either the content pattern or relationship level. The next thing you have to do is start to engage in diagnosis. What caused the gap? And this is so important because honestly, mostly as managers, we think we just have to do the first part, right? I show up with empathy. I share that we are going to talk about a solution. I'm going to hold you accountable. Here's this gap. And then I think, whew, I've done it. I've done my job. I've shown the empathy. I've talked about the gap. Now their job is to go close that gap, right? And we think that's their responsibility. They're causing the gap. They need to close it. But the very best managers and leaders understand that closing that gap is a collaborative process. I don't simply point out the gap to you and expect you to solve it. I'm going to enter into a collaborative, connected relationship and say, "How can I help you? How can we do this together? What do you need?" And in order to effectively close that gap, we need to understand what's causing the gap. Why is it happening? We use and teach a model that many of you are familiar with. If you were on our last webinar, you would have seen the 6 sources as we thought about it in the context of system-wide or organization-wide change through influence. But it's also an incredibly powerful model for accountability, for gap situations. And here's why. The 6 sources of influence, it's just a model of human behavior. It's a model that helps us understand and think about, why do people do or not do what they do? So yes, we can use it if we're thinking about how to drive large scale change through an organization, but we can also look at it and say, wow, I have a human being across from me right now in this conversation. I have a human being that's behaving in a way that's causing a gap, and I want to understand why that is. This is a powerful model where we look at motivation and ability, and we think about how that impacts people at a personal level, how other people, their social environment is impacting their motivation and ability, and how the structural environment, the things in the world around them, are impacting both their motivation and ability. So this is a powerful frame that we teach in Crucial Conversations for Accountability to really think about what is causing this gap. And as we think about it, it's not just for the accountability, but understanding and asking that question, what's causing this gap, can give us a whole new experience of empathy as well. And to see how that comes together, that accountability and that empathy, as we look through the lens of those 6 sources, I want us to listen to my colleague Joseph Grenny, who so many of you probably know if you're familiar with Crucial Learning. If not, you're in for a real treat right here. Joseph's going to give an experience that really, I think, highlights on a very personal level, actually, how the 6 sources changes not just how we see others, right? How we see the problem, how we see the gap, but how we feel about them. Joseph's going to describe a pivotal moment when he experienced this. So let's watch.
Seeing life through the 6 sources of influence will make you a better leader. But for me at least, it also makes me a better person. Looking through the lens of the 6 sources gives me more empathy and more wisdom for those I love most. Let me explain. Both to protect the guilty and for efficiency, I'll share a story that combines a few experiences where having a 6-source view of life helped me show up much better. I got a call one night at 9:30 p.m. A call at night wasn't unusual nor alarming because I had multiple teenagers. In this case, I was surprised because the call was from the police. The officer said, "We have your 13-year-old son here at the station. He and his friends were throwing water balloons at cars." As I drove through the dark, I fumed about my miscreant son. How could he do this? He clearly did it because of bad motives and weak character. Since I was certain this unfortunate occurrence was just about his pitiful soul, the solution was clear. Ask the police to incarcerate him until he was 18. Done. Problem solved. Fortunately, it was a lengthy drive to the police station. As I had time to calm down and breathe again, I began to examine the problem more carefully. I looked at his behavior not just through one lens, but through 6 lenses. Was it just motivation, or could ability be part of it? Then there was social influence. I recalled dozens of stupid decisions I had made to impress my friends. As my vision expanded to include all 6 sources of influence, something profound happened inside me. My self-righteous certainty was replaced by sympathetic curiosity. I didn't know what was really true in this situation, but by the time I pulled into the precinct, I was in a different place emotionally. When I saw my son, he no longer looked like a problem to be solved. He looked like a person to be helped. As we started the drive home, the initial silence in the car was deafening. Finally, I pulled to the side of the road and said, "Hey buddy, it's been a tough day, hasn't it?" He looked at me suspiciously, then conceded, "Yes, it's been awful." I continued, "I understand, I've made mistakes too. There will be consequences to face, but you're going to get through this." My son's demeanor immediately changed, and he seemed to relax. So I continued, "You know what? There's someone else who had a tough night too. Can you think of who that might be?" My son looked confused, then said, "No, who?" I said, "Imagine you're driving a car and suddenly a big hard object slams into your windshield, maybe even cracks it. How would you feel?" He looked startled by the question, and then he hung his head and said, "Dad, I don't have to guess how she felt. I know how she felt, because after she slammed on the brakes, I could see her put her head down on the steering wheel. I think she was crying." He said nothing for a while, and then with moist eyes said, "Dad, do you think I could get that woman's phone number? I'd like to call her and apologize." In that moment, my son started to change. But that change didn't erase what he'd done. The 6 sources of influence aren't about permissiveness, they're about effectiveness. My son had consequences for his choices, but those consequences were part of a robust influence plan that would help him make better choices in the future. Now, I've been teaching these concepts for decades, but they've rarely mattered more to me than they did that night. Looking at the world through the lens of the 6 sources of influence helps us replace judgment with curiosity, replace shame and blame with influence, especially when it matters most.
All right, so I love that. And just a couple of notes. And feel free to share any insights that you gained or thoughts that you had as you were listening to Joseph talk. But 2 things I wanted to call out, both of which he said sort of towards the end. Looking at the 6 sources, right? Trying to understand what caused the gap, hearing about all those things that are impacting. It's not about permissiveness. We don't understand what they all are, so we can say, "Oh, yeah, that is really hard. I guess you get a pass there." It's not about permissiveness, it's about effectiveness. If we're going to really work with people to close these gaps, we have to understand what's causing them. And then, as Joseph said, right, it helps us, it's a model that helps us replace the judgment that we often bring to these gaps with curiosity. And as he said that, I was thinking about, and I wanted to call out Elisa's comment from about a half an hour ago when we were saying, do you err more on empathy or accountability? Where do you start? And her comment was start with curiosity, right? That's such a great place to start because curiosity is going to lead us to understand and be able to express empathy, but also to understand and be able to hold accountable. So I love that idea. And again, yes, feel free to, yeah, oh, there it was. Linda, the same thing that helping that come out, that replacing that judgment with curiosity.
Seeing life.
We don't need to see it again twice though. Now, as you think about that, one of the things that I do think is so critical for managers and leaders when we're in that moment with that person trying to navigate this, and we're looking at all 6 sources and we're saying, is this a motivation or is it an ability? And where do we start? We always encourage managers to start on the side of ability. And let me give you just a really quick metaphor of why. This metaphor is getting a little dated now, but back in the day when I was learning to drive a car, and for many years, I just drove a gas-powered vehicle that had two pedals like they all do, but now, right, self-driving. But let's just assume that we're driving a car, a standard car that has 2 pedals on the floor, right? It has a gas pedal and it has a brake pedal. And as you think about those 2 pedals, right? That gas pedal, it's the motivation. It's the get up and go. It's the thing that pushes that car forward, right? And that brake pedal, it's ability, right? When that brake is fully engaged, you have an ability barrier and that car's not going anywhere. So as you think about that, when you push both pedals all the way to the floor, right? You've got that gas fully engaged and that brake fully engaged. How far does the car go? It doesn't go anywhere. When you have an ability barrier, when that brake is fully engaged, you can give all the motivation you want, right? And it's not going to create change. It's probably going to create depression, right? Because they can't do what you're asking them to do. Now, the flip side is true as well. When I address the ability barrier, when I take my foot off of that brake, when suddenly I am able to move forward, then I don't need to push that gas pedal all the way to the floor to get my car moving. I just need to tap on it. I just need a little bit of motivation and off I go. Right? So we want to always be thinking about how can we remove that ability barrier rather than just laying on more and more motivation. And I want to give you 2 thoughts. One's on the slide, one's in response to a comment that I saw that I want to come back to because I thought it was so spot on. So let me give you 2 sort of frameworks for thinking about how you can start to address problems with people in a way that is empowering and holds them accountable. This first one is something that I learned from a very smart man, Joseph Grenny's dad. Yes, as it turns out, this is where I learned. Joseph Grady's dad taught this framework, and it has been so powerful for me as someone, a manager, a friend, a parent, a neighbor, thinking about how I can help people when they are struggling with big, hard, heavy things. So this is how Joseph's dad explained it, right? You think about it, we all have sort of a stress bucket, a bucket that says, I can deal with certain amount of stress, right? And I have this level of my bucket and at some point it's going to overflow, but I can manage all these different things and I can kind of keep it together. But when something big and hard comes smashing into my bucket, right? The bucket begins to overflow. It begins to overflow and I rise above the level of stress that I can handle. And that's when I need help, right? And that's when I call out for help, hopefully. And what most of our response is to that, when someone comes and says, oh, this huge, horrible thing is happening and I just can't manage it anymore, our natural response is to focus on the huge, big, horrible thing. And we often feel really powerless because we usually can't do anything about that huge, big, horrible thing. But what Joseph's dad taught me is that we don't have to. The most powerful thing you can do to help someone is to just help them get their stress level back below the level they can manage it. They can probably manage that big, hard, horrible thing if you can take a few other smaller things off, right? So we don't have to focus on solving the big, huge, horrible thing. That's going to be theirs, especially when we think about it in a work situation. These are often things that are coming from home and family that we cannot solve for them. but what are the things and what are the ways that we can help? So that's one model to think about. How do we start closing the gap? The other one, I wanted to come to Victoria's comment from a little bit ago, and I know I'm taking it out a bit of context because it was in response to something that I said. But she said, often when I ask this question, and I think that question was like, how can I help? What do you need? Right? Like that problem solving question. I'm guessing that's where that came, Victoria. She said, they ask for someone else to take on the task, which punishes the high performers unfairly. Let me say, amen to that. Absolutely. Yes, that is a common response to that question. You can help by giving this work to someone else, right? And it also definitely punishes the high performers, which leads to burnout of the very people you want to keep most engaged. So it's so wise to be watching for that. Let me give you one thought. Again, this is a very tactical, practical idea of how you can start to manage some of those conversations, because I do believe it is still critically important to engage in a collaborative discussion. They are closest to the problem. They are most likely to know what a good solution will be. So simply imposing a solution on them is not going to be as helpful as asking that question and saying, what do you think? What do you need? How could we solve this? One of the ways that I have found it's very effective to have that conversation is to start first by saying, what are all the needs? Like, what do we need in order to close this gap? What are all the needs? We're not going to talk about who's doing what just needs to be done, right? What are all the needs? Let's just write those out on a piece of paper. And then once we've got them all down, I will often draw on a piece of paper a 3-column diagram. And those 3 columns are you, me, and others. And we'll say, okay, this is all the stuff that needs to be done. Let's look at which part of it you are going to do, which part I'm going to do, and if we need to draw in others to do. And there's something about seeing that laid out that way, right? That puts that onus on what are the things that you need to do? And how can we support you in doing them? But what are the things that you need to do? And what do you need from me and others in order to do them? So we take that list and we kind of shuffle it into those 3 categories. And it's very apparent if everything is getting put over into the other category that we can look and say, you know what? I can see how that would solve this problem, but I think it's going to create a lot of other problems because these folks, they don't have the bandwidth either. So let's see if we can shift this around a little bit more. What would it take to move some of these items back into the you column? What would you need in order to make that happen? It allows for this sort of visual conversation. So we're seeing where responsibilities lie. Now, I'm not saying, Victoria, that that's going to be the perfect solution to your problem, but I do think that there is, again, a balance of we need to be engaging in a collaborative discussion and getting input from the other person so that they have ownership and buy-in into the solution, and not simply letting it be what we would say in the States, right? A passing of the buck or putting that onus or responsibility on someone else. Okay, last thing, and then we are going to save a little time for Q&A. I just want to come back to this moment that I shared with you at the beginning about Maria and Luca, because this organization that and this large restaurant chain that Maria works for has done something extraordinary when it comes to these moments of accountability and showing up with empathy. And the reason that Maria was about to do what I'll tell you she did in this conversation, she handled it beautifully well. The reason she was able to do that was because she had been trained by this woman, Patty Simpson, who is the Chief People Officer of Union Square Hospitality Group. And she is a remarkable, remarkable influencer who really focuses in and says, these are the moments that matter, right? She said, the road to success is paved with mistakes well handled. This is one of her Patty-isms, if you will, right? The road to success is paved with mistakes well handled. She believes that these moments of disproportionate influence, they're not things to be avoided or to try and get around. They actually are the moments that create your success. She's looking for those moments where we have mistakes so that we can show up as managers incredibly well. And that's what's going to create our success. And here is what she taught Maria and all of her managers to do in those moments. She focuses on 2 key things. And this is what she says. I teach my managers to do 2 things in that moment. 1, make a charitable assumption. That's the empathy, right? That's the empathy where I say, I'm going to make a charitable assumption. I'm going to look at the six sources. I'm going to open myself up. I'm going to feel differently about that person, as Joseph talks about, right? We feel differently when our perspective changes. Make a charitable assumption. And this is the accountability she teaches them. Then your goal is to write a great next chapter. Yes, this was a gap. Yes, this was a problem. Yes, this was hard. How are we going to write a great next chapter? I want to write that chapter with you, right? That's what her managers bring to these conversations, to their employees. This confidence, this hope, this forward thinking that says, I want to help you write a great next chapter. So, how are we going to do that going forward? And that's where that accountability piece comes in. Now, with that as a frame, we've got just a few minutes left. We are going to do Q&A. If you have questions, please start chatting them in, or just comments that you'd like to engage in discussion on. That would be great as well. While you're doing that, Josh is going to come back and tell you a little bit more about some of the options you have for how you can dive deeper and go further with this idea of what are the accountability skill sets that our managers and leaders need today in order to show up with both accountability but also with empathy. So once Josh does that, we'll see if we have questions or comments to discuss, and we'll go from there. Josh.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you, Emily. Amazing as always. Always never cease to learn more stuff from you every time you come on here. So thank you so much. Look, just briefly, we'll send there's a question around, do we get a recording? Do we get to see the slides? We will be sending out a recording. We always send an email after all of our webinars. So you'll see, you'll get the first chapter of Crucial Accountability. We'll also send you an ebook around Mind the Gap, which is a fantastic ebook that's been used widely globally with crucial learning in our clients. We often get asked, well, what is crucial accountability training? What is it about? So we've got, there's two options on that front. We have a one-day add-on program. So if you've already done Crucial Conversations training, you can do a one-day add-on. We've got a promo at the moment, which is 2 for 1. So you can bring a colleague as well. Always nice to do that virtually. And you'll go deep into seeing how that the first day of Crucial Conversations, bringing in some of those skills, but also how the Crucial Influence model then comes in, or six source model then comes into supporting the accountability program. If you haven't done Crucial Conversations, we actually offer a 2-day standalone program, which is what I mentioned there. You end up doing the first day of Crucial Conversations, and then you start to then bring in the six source model of Crucial Influence over 2 days. So that's another option. You can see the code there. Well, that'll all be in the email when we go out. And we'll also be doing, just so you're aware, and we'll have it in the email as well. I'm actually doing a roadshow through Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and in Perth. Sorry, Adelaide. We did one recently in person, so we're not doing it again. We are doing a roadshow where you'll be able to hear from some clients. We're doing a bit of a fireside chat on their journey. You'll also be able to hear from, be able to practice one of the modules within Crucial Conversations, which is a really great taster about the program. And also then we're going to be going through the capability model of how this all comes together and how organizations work with us. Sorry, Paula, Tasmania, it's too cold. I'm from Perth. I don't go that far. Sorry, I own 2 jumpers. So basically, I'll put that in the email. Would love to see those organizations that don't know a great deal about the programs or are curious. I'd really encourage you to come along and you'll hear firsthand from clients and also our trainers. Over to you, Emily, for Q&A.
Yes,
Got one there
wonderful.
from Narelle.
Yes, yes, I love it. We're starting with the really hard questions, so that's fantastic. A couple of thoughts, and first of all, right, we have 3 minutes. I cannot solve your problem in 90 seconds. I don't think, Narelle, but I love your question. Here's the first thing I would suggest. This is where we need to be super clear about that gap and what our expectation is, right? And these are where it's a little tricky because I'm wondering, right? I read this and I think, I wonder if anyone's ever had a conversation with this person about, hey, I've noticed this pattern where you get all your assignments done that are for you as an individual and get you further ahead as an individual. But often when you have commitments that you've made to other team members, those get slipped or deprioritized, often not getting done because they don't necessarily serve you directly. Are you seeing that? I'm wondering how that is and help me understand, right? I just want to clarify that we're seeing the right behavior, that we can name the behavior there. So that's one of the things that I would really encourage you is has that direct conversation of here's the behavior I'm seeing, here's what I'd like to be seeing. Has that conversation actually happened in a clear, direct way? And if so, my next question would be like, oh, great. I wonder what the person said in response, right? If they said, yeah, actually, you're right. I don't like working on anything for the team because it's not getting me ahead. And what I really want to do is get a promotion. And the way I'm going to do that is by delivering my own deliverables. Okay, that's some interesting information to see. It's worth then looking back and saying, is that true? Are we actually promoting based only on individual contributions and not on team contributions? In which case, that's kind of not, that's a misalignment of what we are saying we want and what we're actually rewarding, right? It's something for you to look at and think about. But that's kind of that process of where once you have that conversation with that person of, hey, here's the pattern I've noticed. You do really well over here, but we're missing huge things over here. And I'd like to understand why that is. That's what starts to get you unlocked and take you in one direction or another. So I guess my answer would be, what did they directly say when someone directly asked them about it? And again, most of the time it's like, well, we kind of haven't said it that directly yet.
Anything else from anyone? We can have a couple more minutes. Any other questions while we've got Emily? This is her last session with us for the year. So while you've got her, fire away.
And while you're thinking about questions, I have the hardest time with silence, Josh, just like the hardest time with silence. But let me just say this maybe in closing, and I will stay on for questions, right? But let me say this in closing. Accountability is not easy. It's not, but it is so essential, especially, and I want to go back to that idea of when we fail to hold people accountable, we do start playing favorites. We are being unfair to our highest performers. We are picking and choosing. And that I don't think sits well with anyone. So I hope that you'll see accountability as two things. One, a means to say, I'm going to treat everyone equally, right? By holding to the expectations. I'm going to hold everybody my expectations because that's fair and that's right. But I also hope you'll look at accountability as saying, hey, my goal is to help someone improve, to achieve, to accomplish, not to be punitive or come at them with judgment, but to say, I really believe, I think this underlies everything we do at Crucial Learning. I think people can change. And as soon as you really buy into the idea that people can change, accountability isn't hard. It's only hard when we assume people can't change. But once you understand that they can, once you believe that they can, that once you see that they can, then accountability gets so easy because it's really just a conversation about let's make some changes here. So with that, with that, let me do this because I know we're over time. Let me just say goodbye to everyone that needs to drop off. Thank you so much. You're going to get plenty of follow-up information from Josh and team. So appreciate you on the session. If you want to stay on, especially if you are Lucy and you have a question, I will keep talking for a little bit because you can't stop me once I start talking. So Lucy has a great question about sharing a little more around social motivation and ability influencers in the workspace. Yes, so this is such a powerful part of the six source model where we say, hey, everyone around, we are all social animals and we're all influenced by people around us. When I think about social motivation or how other people impact my motivation, I think about it in two ways. One, social norming, right? So you think about your first day on a new job, assuming it's in an actual office. I know for a lot of us it's not anymore, but you walk in and you're kind of paying attention, like, what are people wearing? Do they go out to lunch? Who's sitting by it? Right? You're kind of like sensing and adjusting. What are the norms here? And some of us choose not to buy into those norms. We're like, oh, I'm just gonna wear what I want. But we still are paying attention to them, right? That's that social motivation, that social norming. I'm gonna kind of follow the crowd and do what they're doing, right? I want to be part of that group. We have this need to kind of be part of the group. Now, the other way I think about social motivation or the way in which people motivate us to do things is more overtly peer pressure, right? I got made fun of for doing that, right? When I turned my assignment in early, or got my work done faster, the other people on my team were like, oh, you're just trying to suck up to the manager. And I'm like, oh, wait, okay. I'm going to be influenced by that peer pressure around me. So social norming and peer pressure is how I think about social motivators in the workplace, right? So that social ability, though, this is where it gets a little tricky because sometimes we think about how do I enable or disable behavior, and we start saying, but wait, you're responsible for your own behavior. I think of social ability as teamwork, right? There's so much research out there, and I think we all just know and have a sense of teams can accomplish things that an individual cannot. And what that means is I need other people on the team in order to do that which I need to do. At its simplest example, it could be something like I can't get my report done until Josh sends me the data that I need. I'm not whining. I'm not making an excuse. I literally cannot do it without the data that comes from Josh, right? So this would be an example of where other people impact my ability to do something, right? Josh is going to impact my ability to get my work done because if I don't get the data from him, I can't do it. So that's where I think about that in terms of teamwork. And hopefully that gives you kind of a sense of how you can think about social motivation and social ability in the work context. Okay, great. Oh, thanks, Lucy. Wonderful. All right. So many
That's
beautiful
good.
thank yous. Thank you for all of that. I don't see any other questions, but please know if you have them, reach out in response to the emails from Crucial Dimensions. We'd love to dig into this with you. And what I really love about some of these questions is how specific and real life they are. This is
Mm.
not theory that we're giving you. Our goal is to give people actionable, relevant, practical skills that they can use on the exact kinds of questions that you're raising right here. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a
Thanks,
wonderful
folks.
day.
Thanks, folks. Thank you for making the time. Have a great rest of the day. Thanks, Emma.